There was once a tyrant who summoned one of his subjects into his presence and ordered him to make a chain. This poor blacksmith had to go to work and forge this chain. When it was done, he brought it into the presence of the tyrant, and then again was ordered to make it to double twice the length. And then he brought it again to the tyrant, and again he was ordered to double it. Back he came, and when he had obeyed the order, the tyrant looked at it and then commanded the servants to bind the man hand and foot with the chain that he had made and cast him into prison. That is what the devil does with men and women. He makes us forge our own chain and then binds us with them, hand and foot, to cast us into the darkness. It's fascinating how the very vices in our lives are the very tools that the enemy will use against us. Manipulating just the truth, manipulating what we see and distorting our sight that it's the right here, right now, microwave version of what is going on, of these deep-seated desires inside you and I that are clenching our hearts. He would take it, something sensitive, something tender, something that God has given, and he would just wrap us in something that he helps us to make. I'm going to get you to do the work, but I'm going to confuse you and make what you thought was good be what's used against you. And we are so quick, due to our impatient nature, to seek relentlessly what we want. What we want, what we desire, what we crave, what we long for. We go after it. We fight for it. We look for it. And sometimes to our own demise, because we forfeit the consequences of our actions. Moses ascended Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. And while he was up there with God, getting the 10 Commandments, the people were down at the base of Mount Sinai waiting on Moses to return. In that process, they themselves became impatient. And the thing that they said to themselves is that we need a God to worship. After some finagling and convincing Aaron, the prophet, or the priest that would intercede for the people, convincing him, hey, make us an idol. So then Aaron, taking all the gold and everything and the materials of the people, he then forged what we know as a golden calf. In that 40 days and 40 nights, it was only 40 days total, they grew impatient. And after that, crafted this calf. And so we today have these golden calves that are crafted in ways by our doing with the help of the enemy to only imprison us. And you can find the rest of that in Exodus 32. But Jesus said, you have heard it said. Right out the gate, Jesus is elevating himself above what had been told. Before anything prior, Jesus is saying, I am higher than they. What I say is the example. What I say is the way we function. What I say is life. This is the example. He is literally elevating himself higher than everyone in this moment. And then also he said, you have heard it said. So what was said prior? And then also, who said it? As we see in this particular moment, Jesus does a lot of conversation about the scribes and the Pharisees. And sees these examples that they live, but they are outward focused. The outward show or the act, better known as hypocrites. Furthermore, this tradition was so easy to overlook and confuse what was actually the most important thing. Your heart. What's actually on the inside of you. Not to give any spoiler alerts, it'll be quite some time before we get here. But Jesus says in Matthew 23, 25 through 26, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Jesus is not worried about your appearance. And he's willing to hurt your heart to save your soul. Our society, we're so fascinated with what we see and how we see, because we perceive things through our sight, what we look at, how we look and interpret things in our visual aid. And so this command, that it extends not only to impure actions and words, but even to our very looks, the way we look at things, the way we perceive, our perception, and even furthermore, the thoughts that are in your mind and your heart. So I don't want to surprise you, but you can still lust when you're married. Being married doesn't automatically form your heart. It changes your legal standing, but it doesn't necessarily change the standing of your heart. Jesus is concerned with what goes on here. And what he's after is making sure that our hearts are fundamentally our hearts that are other-centered, filled with sacrificial love. These are the kinds of people he's interested in forming us into as his disciples. So he is worried about what lust does to an actual relationship. That's what he's concerned about, relationship. It all points back to relationship with the Father. And so the first thing that I think lust does is that it distorts relationships. It manipulates, as we talked about earlier. And lust puts an asymmetric design between extracting pleasure and input to get that pleasure that just wrecks relationships. C.S. Lewis says in his book, The Four Loves, we use a most unfortunate idiom when we say of a lustful man prowling the streets. We say he wants a woman. Strictly speaking, a woman is just what he does not want. He wants a pleasure for which a woman happens to be the necessary piece of apparatus. Now, love makes a man really want not a woman, but a particular woman. In some mysterious, quite indisputable fashion, the lover desires the beloved herself, not the pleasure she can give. To summarize, John Tyson says, love wants a person, lust wants an experience. So as I said earlier, our culture today is riddled with what we see, what we look at. I mean, we can all pull out our phone right now and look at any social media platform. That's all based off of sight and perception. The perfect picture of a lifestyle you and I wish we had. Lust doesn't always come in the form of sexual things. Lust is broader than that. It is deeper than that. Things that we crave and we long after, we covet after for someone else. Starts with this inner longing for what you don't have. And so we look at these picture-perfect lives, but at the end of the day, we also look and say, look, I know they're not perfect, but it doesn't keep you from thinking, well, it looks better than my life. It doesn't keep you from looking at it like, well, I wish I had the money they had. It doesn't keep you like, oh, I wish I was where they were. Or you see this long post about Jesus, and you, man, I wish my spirit was there. All these perceptions, all these things that we're glued to, our TV, the news, everything is based off this sight and the way we look at it. But even to narrow it down more specifically, consider Jesus' words. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Men, you're not alone. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a man with lustful intent has already committed adultery with him in her heart. To point in on that word look, here we see the word look. But I think it'd be more appropriate to replace it with the word gaze. Because I think it even better emphasizes the depth of Jesus' message here. The act of gazing, as opposed to looking, is this prolonged, intentional focus. You know what I mean? This deliberate fixation transformed the nature into something deeper and more consuming, even craving. So when we gaze upon someone with lustful intent, it triggers a process that dehumanizes the person we are observing. Lust reduces another human being to an object, stripping away their individuality and their intrinsic worth. They become a something rather than a someone, an object to fulfill our desires rather than a person with their own dignity and value. When you and I begin to even take it a further depth, when this person becomes an object, and then you're fixated on this object, where it consumes your mind, consumes your heart, consumes what you do at any moment's glance, it takes you to a place of what we call worship, where you begin idolizing this feeling and this emotion, where you begin longing after not necessarily the person, as C.S. Lewis said, but the feeling that you get from it. Where lust becomes your God. Lust becomes your idol. Where we look at it and long even more so than we ever did with Jesus. This place of looking and seeing. And this reduction is troubling because it shifts our perception from seeing others as an end in themselves to viewing them as a mere means to our own ends. It disregards the inherent worth of the individual, undermining the fundamental principle that every person is valuable and worthy of respect and love for who they are, not for what they can provide. This deeper understanding calls us to a higher standard of purity and respect in our interactions and thoughts. So reminding us to always honor the true value of every person that you and I encounter, where we can look at a person and treat them as a person, not something that we begin to change in our mind. And then Jesus, even to dig this prod a little bit deeper into what he's conveying to the people who are listening to him, he goes to these radical measures of explaining his point, even so much more than he was at the moment. And he goes in and says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It's pretty gory. Tear it out and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than your entire body, to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Throw it away. So Jesus gives these two illustrations because they absolutely parallel each other in how to avoid the sin itself. The choice of the eye and the hand makes sense because these are the primary elements in the moving from lust, which is what you see, to adultery, which is the action of your hands. He is saying, remove them. Like to the level, the radical measures. Now we both know this isn't literal. It's not literal. Don't mean actually cut them off. So the idea of gouging out and cutting off is, needless to say, to demand a violent, decisive measure for removing the source of temptation. You don't welcome temptation. You flee from temptation. The reason is seen in it causes you to sin. It's a strong term that doesn't seem to indicate just the temptation to general sin, but that what leads you to error. That leads you down a course. You can look at King David's life. In the early ages on, he had many wives. I'm sure you've read that. If you follow his life from the beginning, when he becomes anointed a king, and then you just follow his journey all the way up to the moment that he slept with Bathsheba, the sin didn't just happen there. If you read his life, you will see multiple wives. He married a wife. He married a wife. He married a wife. He married a wife. The sin only grew. It was there the whole time. He never dealt with it. God didn't condone it just because he had it. God was very aware of the sin that was prevalent in his heart. But you see the culmination of what sin does when you don't deal with it. When we just let it be and put it to the side and say some other day. He literally culminated to a point where he slept with Bathsheba. That sin was there. It didn't just happen. It was already culminating because it wasn't dealt with. And the measures that it took to get there. So when someone cease, at this point, the question then will be, when will someone cease to lust? Can someone cease to lust? And I'm not trying to sound discouraging when I say this, but you never will. And what I'm saying is that I want, you can't throw your computer out the window. It won't kill the lust. You can never go to the mall, but that won't kill your lust. You can cut out your eyes, but that won't kill your lust. You can move to a cave in Montana, and that won't kill your lust. You can employ legalism, but that won't kill your lust. And let me be clear. The desire in and of itself is good. What happens is in the Bible uses this term called transgression. Basically, simply put, is when God gives a good gift and we warp it to something bad. You and I can't pray away something that we were created inside of us. You can't pray away your humanity. You can't pray away something that He's given you. What's happening is that desire that's inside of you and inside of me is that we're trying to figure out how to do it on our own means that ultimately creates this mess that we then put on God's table and say, here, deal with it. Then we look at this outside source. It's not an outside source. Sure, there's some outside external things that creates the stimulation. However, the root of the sin is in you and me. And how do we go to Jesus? How do we live in a posture of where we allow Him in? Instead of avoiding it, instead of walking beyond it, how do we let Him in? Because it's not going anywhere. But also to reorient ourselves in these desires is what Jesus wants. That desire that's inside you, He wants to reorient in the way it was meant to be, in order to lead you to a life that's flourishing. Because the effects that you know of lust doesn't just affect just you, but everybody. In the way we view love, in the way we give love, in all these different things. So all these things fall short because they're external amputations when what we need is a heart transformation. These are all external. We need a heart transformation. We need a heart transformation. So as we mark 4 years since the onset of COVID-19, as you all are very aware of, that swept across our globe and altered everything as we know it, we must not forget the persistent, silent pandemic that has been present and continues to grip our world. This unseen, unspoken, undealt with, might even add, crisis predating COVID and enduring beyond it demands our urgent attention. According to American Psychological Association, various international studies have put porn consumption rates at 50 to 99% among men and 30% to 86% among women. Another study showed that the top 20 countries in the world for porn viewing, so put them in lists from 1 to 20. You want to take a stab at who was number one? United States. The average age a child sees internet pornography is between 8 and 11. 8 and 11. The divorce rates actually mirror the consumption of porn. The percentages are pretty much about the same. I don't find that ironic that these things that are prevalent in our hearts that we're dealing with mirror the responses of people's marriages and what's going on with them. Every second, 28,258 users are watching porn. Every second, $3,075 are being spent on it. Every day, 37 videos are made in America. Every day, 2.5 billion, not million, billion emails containing porn are sent or received. And there's 116,000 queries related to child pornography are received. That's a problem. Does that bother you? I mean, it makes you just want to sit there and like cry, man. We got leaders in the church. They fit into the statistic. So the enemy has exploited our vulnerabilities, persuading us to extend this chain again and again and again, creating bondage over people's hearts, people's marriage, our lives, manipulating us, where we spend so much energy trying to manage the shame and guilt that we experience, that we have no time and energy to let Jesus examine us. We're trying to deal with what we're feeling. So what do? Where do we go from here? That's a tough question. But the easy first response is that we must realize that we do not have the strength or self-control in us to defeat the addiction, to defeat the crave for lust. If you and I try on our own strength, sure, you might get through a couple times, but you know you will fail at some point. We must go to Jesus, and we must beg him. Look, just because I'm up here and I'm a pastor and I just so happen to be married doesn't mean I'm immune. Literally, when I was in college, I was addicted. I was addicted to pornography. And in Christian school, might I even add, surrounded by brothers and sisters. But every other time, I couldn't get rid of it. Could not get rid of it. The guilt, the shame that I carried for years, not realizing truly how much it even affected me, my love to other people, primarily my love to Jesus, like for years, all through my college years, at a Christian school, even when Emmaus used to be United City, like the first year that I was here, I was a church plant resident. I was going to go plant a church at some point, but yet my life was still riddled with porn, breaking me down all the time. I literally had a moment where I was just sitting there in Spencer and Jordan's first house that I lived with them. I moved with them like 3 different times. It was this crazy thing. I was like, where you move? They asked me the first time when we were moving. They're like, hey, we're moving. You can go with us or you can live with somebody else. And I literally paused for a minute. I'm like, well, I don't have enough money to live on my own. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. So that was literally what I said. And they were probably like, Jesus, what did we do? And so they had to deal with me for the next 2 years at 3 different places and houses. But at the first house, they had a basement, which I called the dungeon. And that's where I lived, I stayed. There was a living room, there was a bedroom, there was a bathroom. A lot of those giant big water bugs that would traumatize me at nighttime. But I found myself, after a moment of falling into the temptation and sin, just frustrated, angry at myself, done with myself, just so done. I'm like, Jesus, what is wrong with me, man? Why do I keep doing this? Like, I know I'm not supposed to, but at the same time, I just give more every single time. And I just sat there on my knees in this basement, praying that no water bugs would get on me while I was praying. But I literally just broke. I was just like mad. I was done. And I was like, Jesus, I need you. I need you. Like, I can't not stop this without you. I read your word where you say, you're here. Well, I need you to be here. That you would break the strongholds and the bondages that the enemy has put on my life. Break them. Break these things. And Paul says, and the other thing is, as we go to Jesus, as we beg him to deliver us from these chains, we ask the Holy Spirit to transform us and move us through our mind every single day. As Paul said, flee from sexual immorality. It doesn't stay and ponder and reflect and linger. It literally says flee, move away from, run from. So flee from it. The other thing I would say, did you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, who you receive from God? You are not your own. You can't do you because you're his. You are not your own because you were bought for a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. So God's vision is to elevate your sense of worth because you're a temple. You are bought with a price. You're his. Sin in the New Testament is not just some moral failing short of a checklist. We now keep hammering the sex button and hope that a little intimacy might dribble out. Because you and I are made for intimacy. We are made. Yesterday, I got the privilege of doing a wedding for Nathan and Abby. You go here. It was awesome. It was beautiful. But the imagery that is the same for you and I with Christ. As we are married to Christ. As the body is married to Christ. It is the perfect symbolism of what Christ is going to do. Perfect union. Perfect intimacy. And marriage just merely points to that. It just points to what Jesus is going to do with us. This space of perfect intimacy. Being loved. Being wanted. Being seen. That's what marriage points to. That's what he wants. He wants the intimacy. But Jesus says also, if you're hungry, I am the bread of life. If you're in darkness, I'm the light of this world. If you're outside the gate, I will let you in. If you feel that you're dry, he says, if you believe in me, rivers of living water will flow out of you. If you feel like your life doesn't matter, he says, abide in me and fruit will come out of you. If you feel lost, he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So I'm going to give 5 things. I'm like, how do we move forward? How do we respond? How do we move forward as we come out of this place? As we use this desire, the tension, the temptations of lust. I would say the first thing would be confession bans. We've been talking about this for quite some time. But confession bans, a space where you have an individual to talk to and trust, where you can be like, call it for what it is. To speak truth to the situation, what you're dealing with, what you're going through. To have someone to open up. The second one is examine your heart. Now I have on there, this, the battle is self-examination versus self-condemnation. Like how do we view ourselves without getting to the point where we condemn ourselves? Because Jesus says there's no condemnation in Jesus. So if we start condemning, that's not Jesus. Jesus can't do that. He won't do that. So how do we evaluate our heart? How do we examine our heart without getting to the place where we condemn ourselves? That's the thing I feel like most people are struggling with in conversations I've had. And so examine your heart. Confession bans. Have other people to also, from an outside perspective, examine your heart. Allow them to speak into your life. Allow them to look at these secret places, these soft places that are on your heart. Allow them to see it. Thirdly, when did it come into your life? Reflect on the start if you can. If you can sit there and reflect, when did it start? Where did it come from? What caused it? Was it family drama? Was it pain? Was it something that happened to you? Was it something you were introduced to? All these different things. Examine, look, and see how it came in. The fourth one, when am I the weakest? When am I the weakest? When am I most susceptible to do this? And then how can you create a plan to not go to those places when you are weak? Look at it. Find them. Think through them. And the fifth one is you have to fix your gaze on Jesus. Gazing versus glances. Right now, I feel like a lot of times you see glancing at Jesus and we're gazing at our temptation. How can we gaze towards Jesus? As Psalms 27:4 says, David says, I want to gaze at your beauty. I want to look at you. I want to stare at you. I want to be fixated on you. That's where the posture changes. That's where when the glancing of the temptation happens, where you'll see it, you acknowledge it, but you're like, Jesus, I want to keep looking at you. Gaze at Jesus. And as these things go, we encounter transformable dispositions where we respect people for who they are. We give them dignity. We give them value as a human, not an object. Honor, faithfulness, fidelity, humanization. So in closing, as a poor blacksmith that made the chain for the tyrant that ultimately was used to imprison the man, Jesus, the Son of God, has power to break every single chain. Every single chain. My question is do you want him to break it? Do you want the chains to be broken? Do you want the change? Do you believe that he can change you? Transform your heart. Remove and reorient your desires so that you love instead of lust. Or you love a person and not just an experience. Jesus looked at the woman who was caught in adultery. He himself, who had every right and ability to cast the stone on this woman, but he chose not. He said, go and sin no more. Jesus is not going to be standing here stoning you for your struggle, but he's going to walk with you in your struggle. He doesn't love you any less because you do struggle. He loves you 100% all the way, all the time. Even when you get better, it won't change. He will love you the same. He sees who you are and sees who you're becoming. He loves you. So right now, as we are closing, I do want to offer and open up the altar to anyone who wants to come or anyone who wants to be prayed over. You know, we'll have people up here ready to pray. I just want a place to linger, ponder, to meet the Lord. So the altar is open. This isn't supposed to be a place for you to be ridiculed, but a place where you can be welcomed and loved in your struggle. So I want to open it up to be able to pray, be prayed for you at this time.